For the next part of your tile project, we're going to add relief to part of the tile. Relief is an area that is built up on the tile. To do this, you're gonna need a couple of things. You're going to need one of these plastic sewing needles, a roller, a plastic knife, and a bowl with clay slip. Clay slip is just clay mixed with a little bit of water. You're also going to need a chunk of clay, which I'm gonna give you. The area that I'm going to build up with relief is going to be this part with the leaf here. On another piece of paper, I'm gonna put my piece of clay, and I'm gonna take my roller to roll this out flat. You want it to be about 1/4 of an inch thick. Then I'm going to start carving my leaf into my piece of clay. I think that this is a little bit too small, so I'm gonna roll it out a little bit thinner so that my whole leaf fits on it. If your drawing got destroyed, you can just draw directly on the clay with your sewing needle. Luckily, I had a copy of my drawing, so I could print out another one of these to cut out. If you have a picture, you can send it to me, or you can just draw by looking directly at the photograph on your phone. Okay. So I cut out the leaf shape that I'm going to draw. I'm going to put that on my tile, and I'm going to trace the shape with my sewing needle. You can feel where you've traced by rubbing your finger over the tracing. I'm just gonna do the outside lines. I'm not gonna try to capture all the little details. You can do that with yours, but mine is just a little bit too detailed, a little too complicated for me to try to trace every single little thing. I'm done tracing, so I'm going to gently peel my drawing off of my clay. Then I'm going to take my plastic knife and cut out my shape. Now that I have my shape completely carved, I'm going to flip it over. There may be some paper stuck to the back, don't worry about that. I'm going to do something called scoring. To score, I'm going to take the tip of my needle and I'm going to scratch up the back of my piece of clay. This is gonna help this attach to our other piece of clay here. So I'm gonna take my needle, move it in one direction and the opposite direction, just to really rough up the surface. You don't have to do this too firmly. You don't want to cut through the clay, you just want to rough it up. And don't do it too light either. You want to make some good cuts into it that will adhere to the other piece of clay. Also going to come over here and rough up the surface of my clay tile. Now I'm going to take a little bit of slip with my fingers. I'm going to put that slip onto the back of this piece that I'm trying to attach. The slip is sort of like clay glue. And finally, I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to attach it to the surface of my tile. I'm going to try to kind of straighten it out so that it goes over my drawing. And then finally, I'm going to push it so that it attaches firmly to the clay underneath. I don't want to flatten it when I'm pushing. I just want to make sure that it is securely attached. If you have any places where the clay is a little bit bigger than your original tile, you can trim those down. It's a little bit messy looking here, so I'm going to actually carve back into the surface of my tile. I can also take the tip of my knife to kind of fill in any of these little gaps where my drawing was before. That's gonna make it just look a little bit neater, a little bit nicer. The other end of your needle can also be a good tool for carving or for smoothing. This is allowing me to go back in and smooth out over that bottom layer where I have a lot of lines that don't really connect to the leaf on top. If you still have your original photograph on your phone, you can go back and look at that photograph of your original drawing to add in any details that your relief may be missing. As you're carving, you may get little crumbs that start going into your lines. I think the best approach is to go over your lines 2 to 3 times to make them more clear and to get rid of those little crumbs. You can also take the tip of your needle and kind of push those little clay crumbs out and wipe them on your paper. Another technique you can use is to take a finger and smooth back over your lines to kind of smooth those crumbs down. Then you can take your needle again, go through and trace over those lines again, getting those little crumbs out as you go. If you have any areas that you know you want to be very dark later, like if you want a certain area to be black, you can take your needle and roughen up the texture that you want to be black. For example, I know that underneath the heel of my shoe, I want a lot of ink to hold in this one area. I want that to look like a shadow underneath the shoe. So I kind of roughed it up. You can also use a dotting technique to create some little places where later our paint, our clay paint, will get into. Last thing I'm gonna do is add a stem for my leaf. I think like this looks okay to me, but it's a little bit confusing. It's a little bit hard to tell that there's supposed to be a stem for where the leaf sticks out of the shoe. So I'm gonna make one in relief to show that. Even with little pieces like this, you wanna make sure that you scratch and attach and use slip. It's gonna make it so that that one little piece does not fall off. Lastly, if you have really tiny details, you can use an even smaller needle to go back and carve those details. I'm not really happy with how the pattern on my cowboy boot came out, so I'm gonna go back and recarve that area. I'm gonna take my finger and smooth out the clay, and then I'm gonna try to go back in and recarve the pattern that I drew originally. And actually, I'm gonna cut out that pattern, trace it, and redraw it. These needles are really good for tiny little fine details. They're also really helpful for pulling out stubborn pieces of paper that are still sticking to your drawing. You can see here that that small needle really helps to get those fine little details. You can also use your small needle to carve your initials or your name into the corner.